Pandemic. Well, joining us now is Sally McManus, a senior lecturer in health at City, University of London. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Sally. We know the pandemic has taken a big toll on our emotional health. How bad is it, and which groups of people have been most impacted?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's happened over the course of the year has been very interesting. Initially, when the pandemic first struck, there was an initial reaction in the public as a whole. And we saw about a 50% increase in levels of mental distress, so things like anxiety and depression. But over the course of the year that's followed, we've seen that different people have followed very different trajectories over time. So there was one group in particular who experienced a really pronounced increase in mental distress right at the beginning, and then have experienced recovery over time. And this group have tended to be parents with children, they've tended to be women, they've tended to be younger people. And that recovery really coincided with the times that schools reopened. And that had a really big impact because clearly it was a reaction to some of the stresses of combining homeschooling with that return with maintaining work. But we've seen another trajectory in the population, and a somewhat more concerning one. And that is a group of people who've experienced month on month increases in their levels of mental distress during the pandemic. And what's been absolutely key to this group is socioeconomic factors. So what we found in our research is that if you experience debt or increasing struggles with your financial circumstances, that triggers subsequent increases in mental distress. Now, of course, that's a pattern we would expect even before the pandemic, but the pandemic has made it worse because of the socioeconomic factors.
As you've just explained so well, we know it hasn't been an equal opportunities pandemic. Some people even saying that they thrived during lockdowns and dread returning to normality.
Yeah, and actually we found that very much for one group in particular, which is there's a group of children. We did some surveys of children where we interviewed them before and during the pandemic. And there's a particular group of children who found school very stressful. And for this group, often they had special needs, impairments. They may well have found school stressful because they were bullied, for example. And for this group, about a quarter of this group said that their life had got better during the pandemic, that they'd actually valued spending more time at home and with their parents. And for them, the stress comes with the reopening of schools, and as they returned back into back into the school environment. So for many, it's not the lockdown that's stressful; it's the return after lockdown which causes an increase in distress.
There's been a lot of talk, hasn't there, about post-pandemic stress disorder, especially for frontline health workers. How serious are the long-term implications of the trauma that people have lived through?
Yeah, I mean, I think a key thing that we've found is so far we've really been looking at mental distress as an understandable reaction to an abnormal situation. So these are stresses which we don't know yet for which groups they're really going to be sustained in terms of specific mental disorders that would require mental health intervention. What we know is going to be absolutely key. Yes, we need to have health services that are set up and in place, mental health services that are available and sufficient and which people know that they can turn to, because at the moment many people are not turning to mental health because they don't think that those services are available. But alongside health service provision, what's going to be really key for our long-term mental health will be ensuring that those socioeconomic safety nets are in place, because we know that that's going to have long-term impact. One of the key things to come out is that we haven't yet seen across many different countries any increase in the suicide rate. But we need to make sure that we're watching and monitoring that, because we know that recession has had in the past an impact on the suicide rate. So it's very important that that social welfare network and support system is in place, and that we're watching what's going on as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. And you've touched on it there, but what else can governments and employers and communities do? And are some countries getting it right in comparison to the United Kingdom, which, as we both know, has really underfunded mental health services for many, many years?
And that's a really key point. One of the things that many people working in this field say is it's not just what's going on during the pandemic. It was the situation that services were in before the pandemic. So we're already playing catch up. And when we're looking at the increase in the pandemic, we're having to factor in that we've been seeing an increase, particularly in certain groups in the population leading up to the pandemic, in levels of mental distress and in particular mental health conditions. So yes, we've got a lot of catch up to do. And we also need to make sure that going forward, that those sorts of support networks, not only are they in place, but that people can trust and be aware that they're in place. Some of the situation with the furlough scheme has been extremely helpful. But when we've had one-on-one qualitative interviews with people, what they said they found stressful was not knowing whether or not the furlough scheme was going to be there for them in the future. So it's about making sure not only that those support systems are in place, but that people are aware of that, can trust that, and are not worrying about those things being available in the future.
Sally, really good to talk to you. Sally McManus there from City University London. Thank you very much indeed.